I'm Soren, and I'm here today to talk about the price of victory, where I take Age of Sigmar competitive tournament lists and break down the costs not only in monetary value, but also in hobby time invested in order to actually acquire these armies. Today, I'll be talking about the Disciples of Tzeentch. But first, let me tell you about my assumptions. In order to determine the approximate relative value, I use the official Games Workshop website to find the retail price of all the armies I researched. I realize that if you're not too picky, you can pick up your models for less than retail price at places like eBay and Facebook buy and sell groups. But I feel fairly confident in the fact that these armies can be picked up at almost any time through the Games Workshop store. And you may not be able to find the competitive army list that you are looking for through buy and sell groups. Also, I do not assume that those watching are willing to do custom conversions for expensive models. I will, on the other hand, assume that they are willing to convert limited edition models that can no longer be found on the Games Workshop website. Models such as the Skaven Tide Warlock Bombardier. Now, the Disciples of Tzeentch require a summoning pool, and I've made the assumption that they have a summoning pool appropriate for a 2,000 point army, and I base this on their current army list. If the summoning pool is based off of a character ability, such as with the Sylvaneth or Flesh Eater Quartz, and that character ability has a list of specific models to summon, the least expensive option is used. If the summoning pool is based off of a currency, such as this is Disciples today, then the summoning pool is made up of one large model, one small hero, and one infantry squad, plus any units from multi-block box that are on their summonable units. Now, in the case of the Disciples of Tzeentch, Blue Horrors and Brimstone Horrors can be summoned with every unit of Pink Horrors that is killed. So I will be using those as a basis as well. For the hobby section, I've asked 2 local commission painters for an appropriate amount of time that they will base the price of a commission on. My times assume that you are somewhat proficient as a hobbyist and in a hurry. So as such, this is a minimum time investment expected for a tournament-ready force that is not intended to be the definitive guide on how long a specific unit or army will take to build and paint. Now that said, let's go into our first army list. In second place at the London GT in 2019 with a 5-0 record, our first list is a Disciples of Tzeentch list that has a Lord of Change, 30 Pink Horrors, a Herald of Tzeentch, the Changeling, 20 Brimstone Horrors, a selection of endless spells, and a minimum summoning pool of 60 Blue Horrors based on the 30 Pink Horrors, 60 Brimstone Horrors based on the 60 Blue Horrors, a Herald of Tzeentch on disc, a Lord of Change, and 10 Pink Horrors. Now, as the Start Collecting box will need to be obtained in order to get the Herald of Tzeentch on foot, also included in the cost analysis are 3 Flamers of Tzeentch and a Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. In the United States, the expected monetary cost of this army is $920. In Great Britain, it's 572 pounds. In Canada, it's about $1,145, and in Australia, it's about $1,385. The expected hobby time, based on the Lord of Change, is a larger model, but not as large as last time's Marathi. So I'm expecting 16 hours for that. The Herald of Tzeentch and the Changeling are relatively small heroes, so 5 hours apiece. A unit of 10 pink horrors, according to my friends the commission painters, are around 10 hours for a unit of 10. The brimstone horrors are easier, they're about 8 hours. And then, as a general rule, it takes around 1.5 to 2 hours for every endless spell. And this particular list requires 6. One note, the Bellwind Vortex is not currently available on the Games Workshop website in Australia. I went ahead and priced that at 0 for now, as that can most likely be scratch built from other kits or other bits. Now, the minimum hobby time is 238 hours. That is a lot of models, therefore it takes a lot of time. Games Workshop has recently had their grand tournament, the Age of Sigmar GT, and the second place winner of that particular tournament was also a Disciples of Tzeentch player. His list included a Lord of Change, a Gaunt Summoner, Blue Scribes, 30 Pink Horrors, 40 Brimstone Horrors, and a selection of endless spells. The minimum summoning pool based on the list that he had is 60 Blue Horrors, 60 Brimstone Horrors, a Herald of Tzeentch on disc, a Lord of Change, and 10 Pink Horrors. This list in America is $970. In Great Britain, it's £607. In Canada, it's $1,215, and in Australia, it's $1,455. Again, the sheer number of horrors that are required to paint for this particular list brings the total hobby time to 267 hours. Although sometimes you can get away with fewer of the horrors, there are a number of tournaments that disallow recycling units. In other words, your summoning pool must have a new unit for every one that you want to bring on the board. Therefore, the 40 Brimstone Horrors cannot be substituted for the 60 Brimstone Horrors that I have put in the minimum summoning pool. Whether or not you'll actually go through 100 Brimstone Horrors, I will not determine that. I cannot determine that. But some TOs do require that any new units are not recycled. Therefore, the prices for these two 2,000 point lists do bring that up. Also, as a side note, I have put what I think is a minimum summoning pool for most of the units that are here. Unfortunately enough, I don't have an actual list of the summoning pool that they have brought to the event. So things like Hedonites of Slaanesh, the Sylvaneth, and Flesh Eater Courts, I don't know exactly which models they used for their summoning pool. Again, under normal circumstances, I went with the least expensive option if it was a specific named unit, or in the case of Disciples of Tzeentch, I went with a selection based on the list and based on one large, one medium, and one infantry unit. So one large character, in this case, the Lord of Change, a medium character or a small one, the Herald of Tzeentch on disc, and then the infantry unit, which is the Pink Horrors. At the time of recording, the Sydney Slaughter was a 2,500 point event, and I do not have a list of their ranking. So I have taken a random selection of army lists for every one of the factions that I'm covering, and in this particular list has a Lord of Change, a Gaunt Summoner, and Blue Scribes, 10 Pink Horrors, 20 Pink Horrors, 20 Carrick Acolytes, a total of 18 Zangor Enlightened on discs, 6 Flamers of Tzeentch, 10 Blue Horrors, and a pair of endless spells. With this list, the minimum summoning pool is 40 Blue Horrors, 50 Brimstone Horrors, a Herald of Tzeentch on disc, a Lord of Change, and 10 Pink Horrors. In the United States, this particular army will cost $1,105. In Great Britain, it's $682. 682 pounds. In Canada, it's $1365, and in Australia, it's $1633. The hobby time for this particular list, based on the estimates from my commission painter friends, is 247 hours. For these lists, the average cost of a 2,000 point army is $945 American, 590 pounds in Great Britain, $1,180 Canadian, and $1,420 Australian. The average hobby time to actually create these lists is 252 and a half hours. Now, when compared to the average time of a competitive army in the United States, it's $760. In Great Britain, it's around 463 pounds. In Canada, it's about $921. In Australia, it's $1,174. The average hobby time is 160 hours. Clocking in at a grand total of 252 and a half hours for the average hobby time, you will be spending a considerable amount of time over and above the average hobby time. Also, due to the summoning pool, the average cost of the army is almost 25% higher than the average cost of a competitive army. Now, the average cost of a competitive army, as calculated by myself, consists of two 2,000 point armies that are competitive and that have placed within the top 10 generally in recent tournaments for the Daughters of Cain, the Fire Slayers, the Disciples of Tzeentch, Idoneth Deepkin, Hedonites of Slaanesh, the Flesh Eater Courts, Grand Host of Nagash, Skaventide, and Blades of Corn. With these armies, and with the average hobby time and cost, the Disciples of Tzeentch is a significant increase over a less expensive and less hobby-intensive force. You will be dedicating a lot of time and money to this. I hope this has been informative, and until next time, I'm Soren.